This video is going to cover the second part of what we call nervous system 1, which is a spinal cord. This one will not be quite as long. The first video was a little long. Try to keep these under 10 minutes is better. First one was a little long. So next part of this section is the spinal cord. So what we do first is we start by learning all the coverings. If you're a student in our society today, you have to get immunized for meningitis, and that's because of the meninges. So the spinal cord, and to go, before we jump, I'm just going to do this one more time so you can see it there. See, here's the brain, there's the spinal cord, so it comes down this way. So it's got layers around it. And if you start with the outside first, the dura mater, which is there, very outside layer, tough, white, dense connective tissue. If you look up dura, it means tough mother. Arachnoid mater it's supposed to look like a web, very delicate. And in fact, let's see, do I have? I don't. Oh well. On your PowerPoint, there, this is a good picture. Here's the dura. See that little bluish layer, and then the inside is this purple layer, is the arachnoid, and then that pink layer, I know that's really small, represents the pia. And then you have this blue space between those, that's actually called the subarachnoid space. So going back to our picture, here is the dura, this is the arachnoid. See the blue there? That's fluid. That's actually CSF, cerebral spinal fluid. And then there's the pia mater right next to the spinal cord. And if you've ever held a vertebrae, that opening there is about the size of a person's pinky. So you can see how small the spinal cord is, because all these layers have to fit between what's called the vertebral foramen and then the spinal cord along with all the layers. So that's the three layers that surround the spinal cord. Now, this is a side view. You see it's kind of bent this way. This is convex or concave. Convex is when it comes out. But when a person starts walking and supporting the weight, the spinal cord, now this is a side view, not from the back. This is from the back. It's supposed to be straight, but the cervical enlargement is up here. I know there's a blank there, but that's basically where the nerves for the upper body arise from. And I believe right there, I'm sorry about the small writing. Cervical enlargement supplies nerves to the upper limbs. This is the lumbar enlargement, which supplies nerves to the lower limbs, legs, hip area. Where the spinal cord really narrows, which is about L3 or 4, lumbar at the bottom, is an area called the conus medullaris. And that's where it gets narrow and extends down to the sacrum and the coccyx area. Okay, now a cross section. So that's going this way. If you cross section it, in other words, you cut it across. You have a few things here. You can see the white lighter area is the myelinated portions of the spinal cord. The gray is the area that's not myelinated. If you want to orient yourself, see how this this is called the gray matter or the gray horn. See the gray matter? Excuse me, it has horns, but it's gray matter. The gray matter touches in the back. This is the posterior part. This is the anterior part. So the front and the back. There's an anterior median fissure. It's almost cut in half. It is connected there in the middle. This is a deep groove, and there's a thing called the posterior median sulcus, a more shallow groove in the back. These are the anterior horns of the gray matter. Here are the posterior horns. There's the central canal, which is right in the middle of the gray matter. That's spinal fluid, actually flows through there. So that's a real quick. And then here are the nerves coming off. Now I have a better picture for that. But in the back, you have a part called the dorsal root of a spinal nerve, the larger area, ganglion, and then here's the ventral root in the front. So, spinal nerves. And I said I wasn't going to go back, but I am. I lied. So going back up here, you see the spinal nerves coming off the spinal cord. So here's the spinal cord. See the yellow spinal nerves coming off. Cranial nerves come off the underside of the brain. Get to that in the next section. But you see they come down the legs. Okay, those are spinal nerves. And what they do is they come out on each side of a vertebrae called the intervertebral foramen. So on that, okay, on this picture, see this is the back, a person's spine. This is the front. And like I said, see how small the spinal cord is. But see the nerves coming out on each side? There's actually a notch there. Those are spinal nerves. And there are parts of a spinal nerve. I know there are blanks here, but this is filled in for you. In fact, I could almost take those off. I'll leave them there. But okay, see, this is supposed to be the signal coming in to the spinal cord. This is a unipolar neuron. Covered that in the last section, the previous section. So here would be the dendrite. Here's the axon coming in, and you see how it comes into the back of the spinal cord. This is an interneuron, which connects to, this is supposed to be a motor neuron or multipolar. These are both multipolar ones, and it's coming off that way. See this part coming in? Well, okay, so right here, including this, but see the red, the yellow is supposed to be the actual nerve. So this is called the dorsal root. That swollen area, which is where all the cell bodies would be, because remember, unipolar neurons have one extension. It's usually bigger. That's called the dorsal root ganglion. So when you have either areas where nerves are coming together or nerve cell bodies, it's bigger. It's called a ganglia, or ganglion in this case, singular. This is the dorsal root ganglion. This is the dorsal root because it's coming in the back of the spinal cord. And this coming off this way, the yellow, this is a neuron, but the yellow represents a nerve. That's called the ventral root. And you see how these all come out and they merge right there to form what's called a spinal nerve. And the spinal nerve will travel out to organs, muscles, or glands. So see here, see here's the back, here's the front. So there's the dorsal root, there's the ganglion. See how big it is? Well, you can't, this is when the coverings are taken off. There's the ganglion. But see here, it's even called a spinal nerve. So once it's coming out on the outside, and it's all a spinal nerve, we're just trying to show you the parts. And here's the ventral part in the front. You got to understand that to understand a reflex arc. Functions of the spinal cord. It is an area for a reflex arc, and this is a great example. Reflexes, and it also connects the brain to the peripheral nervous system. That'll be the last part of this. So this is called a reflex arc. You have to know all of the parts of a reflex arc. I've been trying to get this to go down. It's weird how Word docs act sometimes. It's like, no. I can make this maybe go up a little. Nope. Well, like right there. You don't have to make it a little closer here, I guess. So it's not quite, it's just that helps my sense of proportionality, I guess. So what this is showing here, if you can see it, and I can make this a little bigger, and this is also in your PowerPoint. I'm going to make it in the center. Person stepping on a tack, okay? Reflexes only involve the spinal cord. And most reflexes have 3 neurons involved, a sensory, an interneuron, and a motor neuron. There is an exception, the whole knee-jerk reflex when a doctor taps on somebody's knee. It's called the knee-jerk reflex. It only involves a sensory and a motor. But let me get bigger again here. All right, so... and I should have maybe put this, I like that you can click on these diagrams on Blackboard and they get really big. But you can blow this up. So here's a person stepping on a tack, which is going to hurt. And right there it says pain receptor in skin. Remember, unipolar neurons have a receptor near a peripheral body part and they carry information into the brain or spinal cord. So here's the nerve. That pain signal is going to travel very quickly in through the dorsal root ganglion, into the back of the spinal cord, which this neuron is immediately going to connect to an interneuron, which is what that little purple pink looking guy is. Those are not myelinated. That's why they're gray in here. This is the unmyelinated area. See how this area is all white or lighter color? That's myelinated. It's going to connect to a motor neuron, which is going to very quickly transmit a signal out to the quadriceps, and that person is going to pick up their foot. Hopefully the tact's not stuck inside there. So that is a reflex arc. You have to know the entire pathway and know both terms, afferent and efferent. So here's a nice little list: receptor, sensory neuron, one or more interneurons within the central nervous system, spinal cord. Like I said, there's an exception. Motor neuron, effector. And then here, I don't want that there. Here is a nice thing to study. So when you get ready to take your exam for this, which is a hard exam, there's a nice little summary. So this is from the receptor into the spinal cord, and this is starting about there is leaving the spinal cord. So that whole thing is called a reflex arc. So last part to this section, and I'm trying to keep this video short, what are called the ascending, descending tracts of the spinal cord. I said I wasn't going to go back, and now this is my third time I've fibbed. But here's the brain. Now you can see the brain. Here's the spinal cord. So the brain is connected to cranial nerves, but it's not really connected to these spinal nerves. And the only way that information out here can get into the brain is by connecting to the spinal cord, which goes up to the brain. And the brain, controlling everything, has to send a signal down the spinal cord and out along these nerves. So that's what the last part of this is, and I'll make this very quick. So ascending, descending tracts. You're talking about the tracts that are going up and down the spinal cord, and they are myelinated. So here's our first contestant. What is an ascending tract? These are sensory. See, here's skin, and it's showing nerve impulses going into the spinal cord. Now this is spread out. It's actually the brain. Here's the medulla oblongata, which is the bottom part of the brain. If you ever watch The Water Boy, you'll never forget where that is. There's the pons, the midbrain, which will be the next section we cover. But you see it comes in this way. Now look, some of these nerve tracts, they cross over. And so if a person's facing this screen, this would be the left side, this is the right side. So they feel something left side of their skin, it's going to end up on the right side of their brain. And that works the same way with the descending tracts. Most of them cross over. If you're right-handed, that means you're left brain dominant. If you write with your left hand, you're right brain dominant, right lobe, right hemisphere dominant. So it goes up the spinal cord, into the brain, through this area called the thalamus, and then see it's reaching there to be processed as whatever that stimulus is: temperature, touch, pressure, pain. Those are ascending tracts. Okay, there are different names for these. The ones called the dorsal columns, which are in the back of the spinal cord, fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. They cross over the medulla. What do? They're sending information with touch, pressure, movement of skin, muscles, tendons, and joints. Just imagine trying to walk and you couldn't feel your feet. So these are kind of always sending sensory information into the brain about the surroundings and what a person's doing. If you take a person who's in a coma that doesn't know anybody's around and you start moving their knees, they'll start breathing faster because their brain thinks they're running. Spinocerebellar tracts, and we haven't got to the cerebellum yet. I'm going to go back up here one more. Well, maybe this one's better. You can see it maybe a little better. It might be bigger. It looks like cauliflower. See this part here? So this on the top is called the cerebrum. See this little area down here, which is part of the hindbrain? That's the cerebellum, and that has to do with coordination and coordination and equilibrium. The spinocerebellar tracts, they go up the spinal cord, they go into the cerebellum, and like it says here, they help with balance. I left that very simple. It's coordination and equilibrium. Damage to that area, person does not have good balance. These are the main tracts. They're called the major sensory pathways. So the example that I showed you in your outline, this guy here, that's a spinocerebellar tract. It goes up the spinal cord, through the thalamus, into the cerebrum. This is the cerebral cortex up here. So those carry information associated with all the major senses. So touch, pain, temperature, and pressure for various regions of the body. They used to go in there and cut those for people who had severe pain so you wouldn't feel anything. So you need to know these are all ascending tracts. They are sensory, or they contain sensory or afferent neurons, and what they do. What are their functions? The descending tracts are going down the spinal cord. So they're originating in the brain and they're going down the spinal cord. The main one here, the cortical spinal tracts, these are the ones that control they're along the voluntary skeletal muscle movements. Right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Because when the nervous system develops in humans, most of it is crossed over. So this is a descending tract. These are motor. So here are the cell bodies in the cerebral cortex. Here are the axons coming down, and then you can see there in the medulla they cross over and they end up on the opposite side. So this would be like if a person's facing this screen, here's the right side of their body, this is the left side muscle. Those are cortical spinal tracts. The other category, reticulospinal, reflexes, muscle tone, posture, sweat glands. Some cross, some do not. Not all things cross over. Hearing doesn't, of course. Ears are on each side. Sight actually crosses, which all those hearing and sight would be considered sensory, but even the optic tracts cross. The left eye is hitting the right back side of the brain. So these are nerve tracts, so make sure you go over your review, know which ones are ascending and descending. We only did two descending, and I'm going to try to keep this short, but yes, read through your outline, and anyway, thanks for joining me.